Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. I'm so excited today to tell you about what I'm going to be reading, like my BookTube friend Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia. Every month this year, I'm going to be spinning a wheel and determining which BookTube friend I'm going to be reading like. I picked 12 at the beginning of the year, and for April, I chose Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia. I had a lot of fun trying to figure out what I was going to read like Tiffany. I had a couple things in mind. I know Tiffany reads a lot of classics, and I immediately was like, I am not reading a Russian classic. I know Tiffany reads a lot of middle grade, a lot of fantasy, and I chatted with Tiffany over Voxer, and I think I came up with a great stack that represents her reading well, and all three are on my shelves. So let me tell you what I'm going to read. So first of all, I kind of knew I needed to have a classic, and I had two Dickens books on my shelf, and I know Tiffany loves Charles Dickens. I haven't always had the greatest luck with Charles Dickens, but of the two books that were on my shelves, she said her favorite, and probably her favorite Dickens, is Great Expectations. The other one I had is Oliver Twist, and she definitely likes this one more, and she said this represents her reading more. So Great Expectations by Charles Dickens is the first book that I'm going to be reading like Tiffany. I think I read this in high school. I remember Pip, Miss Havisham. I don't really remember much of the story, but I'm nervous, but also kind of excited to read Great Expectations again. It's been over 20 years for sure. Then I watched Tiffany's favorites of 2022, and I had a couple ideas of what to read based on that video. And I decided one of them was a nonfiction, Atomic Habits. And I do really want to read Atomic Habits, but I don't want to read a nonfiction and a Dickens for Tiffany, because I feel like that would be too much of asking. That would be too much to ask of myself when I already have a very full May TBR. I just read nonfiction a little slower, and I have a feeling Dickens is going to be a slower read. So I decided not to do Atomic Habits and to do Dickens instead. But also on her list was Emily of Deep Valley, which is also kind of a classic, maybe more of a modern classic. Maybe. When did this get published? 1950. So it could be considered a modern classic. At first I thought this was a middle grade, but Tiffany said it's not a middle grade. Oh, this is by Maud Hart Lovelace, who wrote the Betsy Tacy series. And I believe this takes place in the same world, if you will, as the Betsy Tacy books, but it's not a middle grade. So I'm looking forward to that one. I don't know anything about it. I just know that I really enjoyed the Betsy Tacy series and would like to read more from her. This one says, Emily Webster is an orphan living with her grandfather. She's not like the other girls her age in Deep Valley, Minnesota. After graduation, she longs to join the crowd and go off to college, but she can't leave her grandfather alone at home. Resigning herself to a lost winter, Emily nonetheless throws herself into a new program of study and growing interest in the local Syrian community. And when she meets a handsome new teacher at the high school, she gains more than she ever dreamed possible. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. I remember in the Betsy Tacy series, there is a refugee camp, kind of community right outside of Deep Valley. And I loved that was a part of the book. So I'm excited to read about Emily, and I know Tiffany really loved that one. So it should be good. And then Tiffany loves fantasy and reads a lot of fantasy. So we talked through a couple different options for fantasy, but she also loves middle grade, and so do I. So of course I'm going to pick a middle grade fantasy. And she read and loved Sophie Choir. I think she gave it 5 stars. And The Last Storyguard by Jonathan Auxier. This is the companion to Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes, which I read and really enjoyed. So I'm very excited to kind of read a series book, sort of. It's kind of a companion series, and a middle grade fantasy. I think Jonathan Auxier is a fabulous storyteller, and I know that Tiffany loved this one as well. So here are my 3 books that I'm adding to my May TBR to read like Tiffany. I can't wait till I finish one of them, and I'll tell you about it along the way. Hi friends, I have actually read 2 of my Tiffany books already. So I'm going to talk about these 2 today, and then I have just one left to finish towards the end of the month here. But I first read Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace, and I absolutely loved this book. I know that Tiffany, I think, just read it last year or the year before. It was among her favorites of the year. I did read the Betsy Tacy series, and while I enjoyed it, it wasn't like amazing. It didn't blow me away. I did not have any of the nostalgia attached to it. So I have a couple other of the books that are set in Deep Valley as well. I just haven't gotten to them because I didn't absolutely love the Betsy Tacy series. But I picked up Emily of Deep Valley because Tiffany loved it. And I'm so glad that I did. So we follow Emily, obviously, right when she's graduating from high school at the very beginning. We're kind of seeing her on the outskirts, or feeling like she's on the outskirts of her group of friends. They're friendly with her and she's friendly with them, but she lives a little bit outside of town with her grandfather, and everybody else is preparing to go off to college, but her grandfather is a little bit ill, and so she is planning to stay home. So she feels a little bit outcast because everybody's talking and making all these plans and getting all their clothing ready and all of these things, and she's just kind of planning to stay home and missing out on that adventure that everyone else is excited for. However, she doesn't just sit back and twiddle her thumbs. Emily finds ways to find contentment and purpose in a life that she was afraid was going to be lackluster. And the ways that she does that is just so wonderful. And she meets new friends. There's a Syrian village on the outskirts of town, kind of on the same side of town as where she and her grandfather live. And she befriends two little boys that are Syrian boys one time when they're ice skating, and they become a part of a boys club that she starts. There's just lots of little things that she begins to get more and more involved. She just finds lots of different ways to feel like her life has purpose and meaning, and she separates herself more and more. She still loves her group of friends, always is at the train when they come back from breaks and different things, but is finding that she has just carved a different path for herself. And it's just really lovely. It's really lovely. In the same way that I smile all the way through reading Ella Montgomery books, I just was smiling all the way through this. It had a sweetness, but it wasn't overly sweet. It just was lovely. It just was lovely. And I'm so glad that I picked it up. I'm excited to pick up the other ones that I have by Maud Hart Lovelace as well. So that was a huge hit. 5 stars. Loved it. And then I picked up another classic, and Tiffany and I kind of went back and forth. I knew I needed to read classics because that's a big part of what Tiffany reads. And this is classic, and yet it's not like a scary classic in my mind, or an intimidating one. And I wanted to kind of pick up an intimidating one, but I didn't want to go Russian. I know she loves Russian authors, and I didn't have any on my shelves and didn't want to do that. But she also loves Dickens. And I don't love Dickens, and that hasn't changed, honestly. So I picked up Great Expectations. I have 2 Dickens on my shelf, and she said this one fits her taste more. This is one of her favorite Dickens books. I read Great Expectations, or an abridged version maybe, in high school. I might have read the whole thing. I don't know. I don't really remember. I did not remember the story. I remember there was Pip and Miss Havisham, and that Miss Havisham was a little off her rocker. Now we know that that's true. Yeah. So I knew very little, or remembered very little, about the story going into it. And I did end up listening to this on audio. I think I started in print. I don't know if maybe I should have stuck with the print. I don't know. But I listened to it on audio, and honestly, I was so lost after a little bit. There just was so many different characters being introduced, and I couldn't remember who was who, and I just wasn't feeling invested in the story. And then I remembered, or in one of my lives, we were talking about adaptations, and I'm like, oh my word, there are screen adaptations of Great Expectations. Let me find one and watch it. And I did. I found one that was 6 episodes, so it was a little bit longer than just a movie. And it helped me so much. It helped me to understand who these characters were. It was very different. I will not lie about that. Like the ending of the movie or the show was very different from the ending in the book, but it did help me to get a general idea of the plot of the story, because I was lost in the quagmire. I was lost. I got Pip. I didn't like Pip. I did not like Estella. Oh my word, I did not like Estella. I know she's a product of her upbringing to a degree, but we all have choices that we make, and I did not like the choices Estella made, and the way she treated other people, especially Pip. I did not like Miss Havisham. I don't think you're supposed to, and that's fine. I didn't feel any empathy for Estella or Miss Havisham. And sometimes even when a character is not the greatest, I could still have a level of understanding of why they are that way or whatever. And I just didn't care for them. Pip was whiny and ungrateful. And that's part of the story. He does grow. His character definitely grows throughout this, and I'm glad for that. There were parts that I liked. I mean, I loved Wemmick, the character of Wemmick. Oh my word, I loved Joe so much. I really loved Joe. And Biddy. I really liked Biddy. But those are the characters you're supposed to like. I don't know. I gave it 3 stars. I'm glad that I read it. And I can see how people would really love it. Maybe I just don't read enough classics to appreciate. I don't know. I just didn't love it. And I think, listen, I'm one of those people, unpopular opinion, I don't even really care for A Christmas Carol. I just don't like Dickens' writing. So while I did feel like this was easier to read than other books that I might have tried by him, it just wasn't my favorite. But I read it. So there's that. I have started my 3rd and final Read Like Tiffany book. I'm going to love this. This is middle grade fantasy. Already, I love Sophie. She's a very bookish person. Listen to this first line. It has often been said that one should never judge a book by its cover. As any serious reader can tell you, this is terrible advice. Serious readers know the singular pleasure of handling a well-made book, the heft and texture of the case, the rasp of the spine as you lift the cover, the sweet, dusty aroma of yellow pages as they pass between your fingers. A book is more than a vessel for ideas. It is a living thing in need of love, warmth, and protection. I mean, this is going to be a book for readers, right? I'm excited. I'm excited to continue on with that one. But those are my thoughts of the first 2, and I will come back when I get further or when I finish Sophie Choir and let you know what I think of that one. All right, that's it for now. All right, so I finally, this morning, finished my 3rd Read Like Tiffany book, which was Sophie Choir and the Last Story Guard by Jonathan Auxier. I took forever to read this book. First of all, it's 444 something pages. Very long for a middle grade. And I have just been on an audiobook kick. So reading something in print just took me a really long time. Clearly, today is June 9th. And I'm just now finishing this book that I was planning to read in May. I did have a lot of books to read in May. You've already hopefully seen my wrap up. I had like 14 books on that wrap up. And here are 3 more, 2 that I've finished and 1 that I started in May. So I really liked this story, Sophie Choir. So this is kind of a companion novel. The first book is Peter Nimble and the Fantastic Eyes or something along those lines. And Peter does play a big role in this story as well. But in this one, we really follow Sophie. Sophie and her dad work at a bookshop, and Sophie is a very good book mender. She can fix books. And there is an Inspector Prig in this town who is trying to eliminate books. There's Pyre Day is coming up. There's going to be this huge fire, and all the books in town, basically all the stories, anything that is remotely magical is going to be burned on this fire. Sophie just doesn't sit well with her. And then one day Peter Nimble shows up with his sidekick and presents her with a book, the Book of Who. And Sophie begins to learn about her mom, who has passed away when she was very, very little. And she learns about being a story guard because she is the story guard who has to protect this Book of Who. And Sophie has worked her whole life in a bookshop. She's always kind of dreamed about going out and having adventures. And here we go. The adventures are thrust upon her. Her dad doesn't want her to go. And this whole book is really a love story to stories and magic and how magic is in the world around us as long as anybody has any kind of sense of wonder. And there are the villains, of course, who are putting roadblocks in the way, and this inspector of the town is just evil and destroying all kinds of things, and Sophie has to save the world. At least her little town. I really liked it. It was fun. It was adventurous. It was quirky at times and delightful, and yet it still took me quite a while to finish. but I really did enjoy it, and I know Tiffany did as well. So if we look at the 3 books that I've read, Emily of Deep Valley, Great Expectations, and then Sophie Choir, this goes solidly in the middle. So of my 3 Tiffany books, by far, Emily of Deep Valley was spectacular. I love this book so much. 5 stars. I really want to read more Maud Hart Lovelace that are not the Bessie Tacy books, but are in that same community. I have a couple others, Carney's House Party, Winona's something. I think those are the other 2 shorter novels, but I absolutely loved Emily of Deep Valley. Really enjoyed Sophie Choir and The Last Storyguard, and then didn't really love Great Expectations, but that's not a surprise. Dickens and I don't always get along, but I read it, and I'm very proud of myself for that. So these are my Read Like Tiffany books. Yay! I think Tiffany and I definitely have some overlap in this kind of sweet classic that is very heartwarming. This is a classic that was not very heartwarming, but this was a classic that was, and I really love this kind of classic very much. And then Sophie Choir, the middle grade. We have a lot of overlap in middle grade, and yeah, so I didn't really learn anything brand new about myself, but I'm so glad that I did this project. Thanks, Tiffany, for working with me to come up with this list. And that's going to be it for me today. I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you read any of these 3 books? Are any of them being added to your TBR? Do you have any overlap in reading taste as Tiffany? And I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.